In this video, we'll actually finish up Chapter 1, looking at, again, some of the elements that we use for grouping things together. First, before we do that, though, I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of block level and inline level elements. All the elements that live inside the body element fall into one of those two categories. With a block level, it means that they appear on the screen as if they have a carriage return or line feed break before and after them. They can contain other block level elements as well as the inline elements. Inline elements, on the other hand, appear within sentences and do not appear on new lines of their own. Inline elements may contain block level elements and can appear only within block level elements. So if we look at an example of that, the block level elements that you see here are the H1 and the P, the paragraph tag. Those are block level. We talked about them. We talked about how they would put a line above and between, or above and below. Inside of the paragraph tag, though, we have strong tags and two different code tags. These are inline tags. So we view this, it would not make the block level elements or the greater than or less than H1 greater than or the less than greater than P, it will not make those on a new line. They will still be within the sentence, that is the paragraph here. So they're inline. They do not make that carriage return line feed like the block level do. And here you can see, here's where the strong would have been. Here's the first code and the second code elements. They're still within the same sentence. They did not automatically put a carriage return line feed to them like the block level and the paragraph did. One of the most interesting new additions to the HTML5 specification was a number of new elements added to aid in the grouping of content. The one thing that was lacking before HTML5 was the ability to group all the well-deserved or well-described content into meaningful ways. There's much more greater flexibility now in a way you can structure pages with this new markup, and it serves somewhat as being their own contents, as you'll see as we go through these. As an aid to work with the HTML5 documents, there's a handy bookmarklet and Google Chrome extension called the HTML5 Outliner that will help analyze the structure of your pages for you. The first of those grouping contents is one that has been around for a while. It didn't come out in HTML5. That's the div element. Div standing for divider. It's the most common for all the group elements, mostly because it's been around the longest. So if you think of it as a divider tag or a division tag, it divides the page up into sections, and then you could use that div as that section, giving it an ID or possibly even a class. It's just a generic block of content that's designed to be used within a class or an ID to give structure to the documents. There's no semantic meaning behind a div, no matter how well chosen the class names or IDs are. So as you can see here with the class of header for the divider, it's really talking about using this, if you read into this, that's going to be a header section or the head of the page. But it's not really all that clear that that's what that is. So you could use the class and IDs to kind of be a little bit more specific about them, but it's going to take a class or an ID to actually tell you what this is being used for. And then you'll see some other elements as we go through here that'll actually be a little bit more meaningful for you. One would be the header, an example we just looked at. Since that is a header, rather than having a paragraph tag with a ambiguous class attribute with a value of header, we just put it in a header tag. It's now more meaningful when somebody's reading the code. They don't have to read into the meaning you gave the class name. The element itself says it. It's a header. It's the header of the page. Normally this is the introductory or navigation content is displayed within the header and repeated on every single page. Within that header you can actually group elements together. The Hgroup element is designed to group together multiple levels of headings that have the same logical connection. So in our example of the example cafe and its serving homestyle example markup, those two are pretty much the same. I mean, it's the same concept, it's the same part. So we just group them together then with the Hgroup. Again, it's just being able to make these elements meaningful for us so that reading the HTML makes sense. It makes it easier to read it and understand what each section is for. The nav element usually used for navigation section. That's a list of links or other pages to other pages or site sections within the application. So this would be for our menu then, and our menu in this particular example using the anchor tag would be for recipes, menu, opening times, and contact HTML. You can use the section element to represent a section of the document or application. It differs from the div by the idea that content contained in a section is designed to be part of the document's outline. So here it's showing you a section for introduction, a section for recipes, a section for menu, and a section for opening times. An article element is used to mark up independent content. The basic rule of thumb is that if the content can be syndicated or shared without the rest of the site context, it should be marked up as an article. You can see here in this particular example we use the article and it contained both the header and a paragraph tag, the header being the example cafe and the paragraph being somewhat of a description of it. But you could take these two things out of the context of the rest of the page and they would be meaningful in and of themselves as an article. The HR element creates a horizontal rule across the page. It's an empty element just like we saw with the break tag. And it's used a lot to distinguish sections of the page by just putting a line across in between them to kind of separate them. The blockquote element is used when you want to quote a passage from another source. The text inside the blockquote element is usually indented from both the left and the right edges of the surrounding text. Some browsers actually italicize it as well. If you use the cite attribute with the blockquote, that's used to indicate the source of the quote. The value of this attribute should be a full absolute URL pointing to an online document. Most browsers don't currently do anything with this attribute, but it means the source of the quote is where you should need it in the future. And somebody that's looking at the code itself, editing it or adding to it or whatever, would see that in the HTML and know where you got that quote from. In this example, you see we have a paragraph tag and a block quote. The block quote is a block level element, so it's going to put a line above and below, and it will indent this content then from either side of the page. Now it's hard to tell in this, but here's the paragraph. Block quote we had is the second line here, and it's clear that it's indented from the left. It's not so clear it's indented from the right, but if we were to resize our browser, you can see now that it's not only indented here, but it also has indentation here. You can tell by the content above that's flowing over it. So it indents it from both sides. The aside element is used to mark up related content such as pull quotes, sidebars, ads, things like that. The content in the aside should be related to the surrounding content. Should not be something that's totally different. Here we have some HTML where we have an article with a header tag and a paragraph tag, and then we have an aside to that, which is that it's where to find a restaurant. So this is just an aside comment to the paragraph tag. Last two would be the footer element. Like the header element, it's extremely common to use that as a class name or ID name in a divider. However, now that we have the footer element, we could use that in place of a divider with that class or ID. Common usage, the footer is for legal copy at the bottom of the page. The address element, used to mark up the contact information for an article element or the document as a whole. This would be at the bottom of the page as well. Usually contains the company's name, address, mailing address, sometimes the copyright, things like that, but it's usually held for the address of the company that is behind the website itself. Then we get to our lists. We have three different types of lists. We have an unordered list, that's just with bullet points. We have an ordered list, which would be numeric or alphanumeric, could also be Roman numerals. And then we have a definition that allows you to specify a term and then show the definition of that. You use the UL, as I said, for an unordered list. It's going to make a list of bullet points that write the list within the UL element and put a bullet point next to it. Each bullet point or line you want to write should be contained inside of the opening and closing LI tags, list item tags. So a good example of that here with our navigation would be that we have our navigation, we have a UL, we have several LIs inside of it, and then we close the UL and close the navigation. This is using an unordered list is a very common way of doing a menu. So if we take a look at some code here, here's the UL and it has three LIs. If we look at this in our browser, you'll see the list with three bullets. That bullet is the actual type. And three different ways of displaying a bullet is the default, which you saw as the disk. So we can use the type attribute, and by default it's disk. We could also make it a circle, or we can also make it a square. And you can use the type attribute on not only the UL but individually on the LIs. So by default then it's a bullet, which is a filled in circle. We're going to then change this to circle here and then rechange the last one into a square, and actually we'll reset the middle one back to its original, which would be disk. So now we should have a circle, a solid disk, and a square. And there you can see the three different types for an unordered list: circle, disk, square. And as I said, they can be done within the actual UL itself, or you can do that within the LI as you saw in the bottom two here. In an ordered list, OL is the element, you can use either numbers, letters, or Roman numerals to prefix the list items. An ordered list is contained inside the OL. Each item, again, just like in the unordered list, is in an LI tag. If you want to specify the number that a numbered list should start with, you can use the start attribute on the OL. The value of that attribute should be numeric representation of the point in the list. The Boolean reversed element or reversed attribute allows you to reverse the order of the ordered list. So instead of going from the lowest to the highest, it goes from the highest to the lowest. But unfortunately right now that's only supported in Chrome. So if we look at an example for this, again, we could change this using the type for the ordered list. If we put in lowercase I, it's going to give us lowercase Roman numerals. If we put in a capital A, it's going to give us capital ABC, lowercase alphabet. Numeric, just put a number, it's going to do that. Uppercase Roman numeral, you could do that as well. So we'll leave it at that one since that's the last one I have. So if we look at that, then we've got the Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3. Now if we wanted, as I just said in this slide, we could also add a start value. And let's say that for some reason we wanted this to start at 10 instead of at 1. So if we do that and go back to this page again, refresh it, we now start at 10, 11, and 12. You're going to use the numeric value for that no matter what you're displaying the numbers as, and it's going to start with a 10th one. The other thing with this is that if this was alphabetic, start at 4, 4 would be A, B, C, fourth letter is D. So if we look at this again, you'll see then that it starts with D, E, and F. I do have a chart here as well that's going to show you that number 1 is going to show decimal numbers. That's the default. Lowercase a, lowercase I, uppercase I. These are all the things that we talked about. And the last type of list we want to talk about is a definition list. This is a special kind of list for providing terms followed by a short text definition or description of them. The definition lists are contained inside of a DL element. It's a containing element. The DL element then contains alternating DT and DD elements, both of which are also container elements. The content of the DT is the term that you define. The DD element contains the definition of the previous term. And as I said, these are all container tags. So you can see in this example then we have one DL that's a container tag. Let's do it this way. There's its opening and closing. We have one term, its definition. Second term, its definition. Third term, and then its definition. And all this is really going to do is indent the definition of the definition type. It's not going to format it in any other way. But it's easy in code than seeing that DL and the DD and DTs that it is a definition list. And then we can nest lists as well. You can nest a list inside of other lists. You number each nested list separately unless you specify otherwise using the start attribute. And you should place a new list item inside of the LI element. So in this example here, you can see we start off with an ordered list that's doing Roman numerals uppercase. It's going to have I, IV, and then you have item 4, and the LI opening tag and LI closing tag contain another ordered list. It's important that it is between the opening and closing LI tags. It is part of that list item. It's further defining it. In this case, we're using the lowercase I, and then we have 3 items listed underneath of that. So this nested list then would end up looking like this. We have the numbers from the primary list, the parent list, and then we have the 3 items from the nested list. Again, I can't stress how important this is, that the nested list is fully and wholly contained inside of an LI. That's going to become very important in the future for us. So with that then, we are complete with Chapter 1.